Okay, the final item of business this evening is the members' business debate on motion 18847 in the name of Elena Whitham on bereavement support and awareness. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons and I invite Elena Whitham to open the debate. Around 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to start by thanking colleagues across the Chamber who signed my motion securing this important debate today. Every person in this room will have experienced loss, and how we react to that loss varies from person to person. And as individual as we all are, all responses are valid and should be respected accordingly. Today's debate is about emphasising the importance of strong, compassionate bereavement support at every level of society, support that guides people through one of the most difficult experiences any of us will face. This week marks National Grief Awareness Week, organised by the wonderfully supportive Good Grief Trust. This year's theme is Growing with Grief, highlighting that even though the loss of someone marks an end, it can also become the ground from which something new begins. A bereavement changes us as an individual, but with an ear to listen and a shoulder to lean on, we have the opportunity to grow into someone new, shaped by love, memories and resilience. The pain may always remain, but hope eventually returns. Presiding Officer, on the 11th of August 2021, I had just arrived at my mother-in-law's house in Carlisle after a weekend out in the camper van with my husband when my phone rang. I saw it was my grandpa's house phone, and when I answered it, I heard the grief in my aunt's voice as she started to speak. And I don't remember this, but apparently I shouted, "No, don't say it," as I knew she was going to tell me that he had died. Somehow, even in his 95th year, as hale and hearty as he was, it felt like he was going to be with us forever. And I was wholly unprepared for the visceral grief that overtook me in a whole-body reaction at the loss of this giant amongst men. He was a teller of tales, the bestower of a solid moral compass and a deep believer in social justice. And he helped make me who I am today. And I felt as if my arm was cut off, not even my arm, maybe a leg as well. And we immediately left for home, and in a very surreal twist, we were caught up in a major accident on the motorway that saw us serving hot drinks from our camper van and letting folk use the loo as kids played kickabout on the deserted tarmac for hours. At the time, it was indescribable to be prevented from getting home, but in retrospect, I now see the value and the serendipity of our camper being right where it needed to be in that moment. And I know that my grandpa would have wanted me to be a helper in such a crisis, whilst I alternated between sobbing, and I mean viscerally sobbing, and helping. I felt him close by. So I want to focus today on what those in power can do to create a whole systems approach that fosters a national understanding of grief, supporting people through it at all stages, enabling hope to re-emerge. Earlier this year, I was contacted by L&M Therapeutic Services, whose expert team offers counselling support to my constituents, and I'm pleased that they were able to make it here today in Parliament to listen to our discussion. They raised with me the lack of easily accessed bereavement support at both national and local levels, and also highlighted the stigma that exists for those experiencing grief. In 2011, the Scottish Government issued a framework for action for NHS boards to improve their bereavement care following the publication of the Shaping Bereavement Care report. 14 years down the line, each health board should have a well-developed plan and implementation well underway. In 2021, the UK Commission on Bereavement was established to instigate the key issues related to bereavement, the key issues related to bereavement and to make recommendations on improving support for bereaved people across the UK. Their report suggested that the Scottish Government should adopt a cross-departmental bereavement strategy that recognises bereavement support as a human right, paying particular attention to those with protected characteristics and those facing disadvantage. And I would welcome confirmation from the Minister if these policies are now in place and what further improvements are in train. Grief can have a devastating impact on our ability to work and to work well. Whilst I acknowledge for some work can be a welcome distraction, for many of us it feels like the rest of the world is continuing to turn as our lives are forever changed. In the UK, there is no general statutory right to bereavement leave for employees except for parents who lose a child under 18 or who have had a stillbirth after 24 weeks of pregnancy. For all other situations, employees must rely on their employer's discretionary compassionate leave policy, take sick leave or use holiday time. This leaves large groups of people with no legal right to paid time off. This in turn forces people back into the workplace when they simply aren't ready. Bereavement support charity Sue Ryder estimates that bereavement costs the UK economy an estimated £23 billion a year in lost GVA and costs the UK Treasury an estimated £8 billion in reduced tax revenues, increased healthcare costs and social security payments. And you can translate that across into our devolved income generation and social security payments. Clearly, if we support people through their grief, we can support them back into work and support our economy at the same time. But care and support alone are not enough. If we want meaningful improvement, we must also confront the stigma that still surrounds grief. It can be easier to understand someone's grief when they lose a person very close to them, but grief is much more complex than that. People can grieve for many different kinds of relationships, even for those that were complicated, that were distant, or that were unresolved. And grief doesn't follow a timetable. In the immediate aftermath of a death, people are consumed with paperwork, funeral arrangements and visitors. And these distractions can delay the emotional impact, causing grief to surface months later, leaving the grieving person adrift without understanding or support from others. That stigma can make them feel their emotions are somehow less valid or legitimate, or even a nuisance when everybody else has moved on. We must improve education around death and encourage open, honest conversations about it from a young age. And I wrote to the Mental Wellbeing Minister in March of this year, who confirmed to me that the current curriculum framework does include learning skills and strategies to support children and young people in challenging times, particularly in relation to change and loss. And this is more welcome, but I think we need to go further. My neighbouring constituency of Ayr saw Gabby Williamson launch her Let's Blether boxes following the death of her father. These boxes contain resources that help children with their grief and are available to all primary school pupils in South Ayrshire, which is part of my constituency. This is a fantastic initiative and I would love to see it replicated everywhere. Presiding Officer, 7 minutes is nowhere near enough time to explore a subject as complex and as personal as bereavement. So let me close with this. We need clearer messaging about what support already exists. We need stronger understanding of where the gaps are and a plan to address them. And we need to talk openly about death and dying, creating a culture where death is not a taboo, but a shared human reality. And if we do this, we will build a country where everyone is supported through loss, encouraged to grow, and able to find hope again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Whitham. We move to the open debate. I call first Brian Whittle to be followed by Christine Graham. Around 4 minutes. Mr Whittle.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I thank Elena Whitham for bringing this subject to the Chamber and my admiration to her for the way in which she insists that we tackle subjects that are extremely difficult to raise all the time. As she has indicated, as Helen has indicated, bereavement comes along in very different forms and, more importantly, different ways in which we deal with them. Inevitably, as we get older, we lose people. There is a circle of life, as she indicated, when we lose, usually first, we lose our grandparents, older members of our family and eventually our parents. But as you age, it is likely we will lose people that we feel that we shouldn't. Sorry, Presiding Officer.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I hadn't meant to speak this evening, but listening to Elena Whitman, it made me think of an organisation in my own constituency, founded by Mariam Tariq, who was actually my champion this year, who started the Miracle Foundation specifically because they suffered a bereavement from a tragic accident in their family, and she felt there was no support for the children, and is now, just a few years later, engaged with the NHS, engaged with the hospices and working really, really hard. And I just wanted to offer that as another example of the great work that's been done in Scotland and across our constituencies.
Thank you. Brian Whittle.
Thank you. Now, it's 12 years since we lost Todd Bennett, one of the great indestructibles. I still have his number on my phone. I still have all his social media and his texts. And earlier this year, I lost somebody really close to me. Still have her number. all our social media and our messages. And I have photographs and reminders that pop up on my social media just when I feel safe. And there's that jab in the stomach again. And they say that time is a real healer and we eventually get over our grief. But I don't think so. To me, when it comes to grief, we actually learn to carry it. We learn to accommodate it. But it's never away. And how we accommodate that grief, perhaps, is what we're discussing and what the role of bereavement care comes in. So what I really wanted to talk about was the grief of losing a child, especially in childbirth. One of my first ever cases was for a gentleman by the name of Fraser Morton and his partner June. And they lost Lucas in childbirth. The hospital said he was stillborn. Fraser and June disagreed. They needed to know that Lucas had been there, even for the briefest of moments, that they could register him and get that birth certificate. And it was a fight, including meetings with the Health Secretary and the CMO and an HIS investigation before there was an acceptance that there had been a failure of the NHS and that actually the neonatal unit was 24 staff short. Fraser posted a couple of weeks ago that Lucas would have turned 10. And I can't imagine how a loss such as Fraser and June's affects you and how it would, no chance that that would ever go away. And as Elena Whitham said, there's supposed to be bereavement care in place for all NHS groups. But that is the inevitable evidence that is not the case across, as Fraser Morton's case suggests. And the SANS charity, which I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, as it happens, around the lack of bereavement services. And my own daughter is a midwife. Midwives often do not have the time to deliver the bereavement care that they are trained to do. And I read the Marriott as poster was done. I will take it.
Paul
That
McLean.
point, Brian, and I've got a meeting coming up with SANS as well, but I've also had the pleasure of engaging with Held in Our Hearts, who are a charity who obviously work with families as well who've lost young children or late miscarriages and so on. So I think it's a really important issue that you're mentioning here. They're working probably with 4 or 5 local authorities, but there is an issue then trying to extend that across the whole of Scotland. So it's a really important point I think you've mentioned in this. So the likes of Held in Our Hearts and SANS are playing an incredibly important part in that. And we have family members who also went through that issue as well. So that's a really important issue. You've mentioned that, and I'm glad you raised that. And I'm happy to work with him on any issues that he raises in the future on that point.
Yeah, thank you very much for the member's intervention there. I think SANS are incredibly important in this because there is funding through Scottish Government, and SANS are leading particularly on that. And I'll finish, Presiding Officer, just to say that in the Marie Curie brief, they talked about that right to bereavement support. And as Elena Whitham said, that's supposed to be in place. But I still think we've got quite a bit of work to do. So can I once again thank Elena Whitham for bringing this debate to the Chamber. And I look forward to hearing what everybody else has to say. Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. I now call Christine Graham to be followed by Carol Mochan.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I congratulate my colleague on securing this debate on what can be a taboo issue, grief and bereavement, 2 sides of the same coin. Grief can be immediate. It can be there even when your loved one is still alive, but in the last sometimes painful days and even weeks of life, bereavement can begin even then. Of course, at funerals, memorials, anniversaries, Christmas, New Year, it can be anticipated, but it can pop up even years later. A certain melody, the scent of a flower, and out of the blue, you are heavy with sadness. And today, immortalised in our social media, that is also tough. It's so wrong for someone to say, it's been nearly a year, you'd think they'd have moved on. Some do, others don't. Some drink their way out of grief. It doesn't usually work. Some throw themselves into work, into projects. Sometimes that does work, but sometimes it is grief deferred. The loss of a child through an accident can bring parents together, but it can also tear a relationship apart. For suicides of a loved one, there is guilt. So there's no script, no roadmap that will suit everyone. And that's where individual bereavement counselling services come in. And I'll refer to two such. It was humbling here to view the Lothian Speak Their Name quilt memorial in Parliament. The quilt was handcrafted to remember loved ones who took their own lives, and it was crafted by a group of 49 friends and family members. I heard about how those who helped create this beautiful memorial found strength in the new community they formed, sitting together chatting, just incidentally, starting conversations about the loved one they had lost to suicide, about mental health, about their own well-being, how to cope, sharing with others in the same boat as themselves. That quilt tours the Lothians, helping to start conversations about mental health and suicide, in the hope that will help those who have lost a loved one and perhaps also save lives. There's also the Scottish Borders widowed community, and it was my privilege to meet two Borders widows who are members quite recently. It's a peer-to-peer support group offering long-term, compassionate support to men and women across the borders who've lost a partner. As the only group of its kind in the region, it provides a much-needed space for people to connect with others who truly understand what it means to be widowed. It meets monthly in person in Galashiels, with ongoing private online support available at any time, including on difficult days, such as anniversary or those moments of grief that arise quite unexpectedly. Members also organise social activities like walks, cinema outings and coffee meetups, simple but powerful opportunities to find connection and presence amidst profound loss. It is entirely volunteer-run, with all members of the team themselves widowed. Over the past 3 years, the group has grown to nearly 480 members, offering a lifeline to many facing isolation and continual heartbreak. Their approach is centred on sustained long-term support, not just in the immediate aftermath of bereavement. One of their aims is to encourage more open conversations about death, not just emotionally, but also in practical and mental terms, with an emphasis on preparedness and reducing the silence that often surrounds grief and loss. Their motto is, "Life grows around your grief." That is a kind and compassionate thought. And though it's a difficult path, with steps forward and many steps back, these organisations and others help to keep folk on a forward path. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Graham. I now call Carol Mochan again, around 4 minutes. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also thank Elena Whitham for bringing this really important debate to the Chamber tonight. As the motion says, and as other members have included in their contributions, bereavement is not always an easy subject to discuss. Yet all of us here in this place and our constituents will experience some form of bereavement at various times of our life. Bereavement is a complex and very personal experience. Everyone is different and there's no single way to grieve. We will all personally know, having our own experiences or from seeing family and friends grieving, that everyone experiences this in their very own way, and that people can have their own beliefs, rituals and plans to help them deal with death. However, what we also know is that people struggle. People experience things they never imagined they would, and life is not always kind when these moments strike us. Sometimes we are prepared, and sometimes we are utterly not prepared. It's for these reasons and so many others that members have mentioned that we do need good bereavement support to guide people through what is an often very difficult time. In researching for this debate, it is clear people need both practical advice, as others have mentioned, and that emotional support and ongoing emotional support. Registering a death, following the rules for burial and costs can be both practically very difficult, but also emotionally draining. And the time following to grieve in the longer term is complex for so many people. As other members had said, there's no time frame. People have to deal with it in the way and time that they need. We know from the report mentioned in the motion, Bereavement is Everyone's Business, that although we might imagine people do have networks and support, the data tells us this quite differently. In the Commission's report, 28% of adults responded to the consultation saying they received no support from family, and almost 46% said that they didn't get support from friends following bereavement. 61% of adults responded that they had difficulty with at least one practical or administrative task following bereavement, really making us think about, these are things that have to happen. So we need to have support. And over 40% of adults responded that they had wanted formal bereavement support but didn't know how to receive that. People find this subject of death just so difficult, and I wanted just my own story is that I remember once dropping my kids at school and going over to another mum to say how sorry I was about the death of her father. In that moment, I could see she was very upset. And the reason was that people were avoiding her. And that was so difficult to deal with on top of all this grief. Her bereavement and saying something about her father, she really wanted that, but clearly so many people were finding it difficult, and so their reaction was to walk away and say nothing. So much of my thoughts on this debate has been, how do we support people to be a support to our family, our friends and our colleagues when they're experiencing this bereavement and grief? The death of a loved one will happen to us all, and it is incumbent on us all to try and support people. I'm pleased to see in the update to the report that there has been some positive work right across the 4 nations, including some look at how do we support people with bereavement, employment, sort of bereavement policies, how do we do work at school, some of the stuff the Scottish Government has done in terms of palliative care strategy and having bereavement in there. And of course the organisations that other members have mentioned, people tell us how important they are, and we must as a Parliament commit to these. All these measures are very welcome, but of course there's always more needs to be done, and that's why this debate is so important. It's important that we talk about bereavement to understand its impact and the profound changes that bereaved people can face, dealing with both those practical and emotional consequences. And so I really welcome the debate, and I thank all the members for contributing tonight. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. And I invite Tom Arthur to respond to the debate. Minister, around 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank Elena Whitham for securing this debate on the important issue of bereavement, which will affect, of course, everyone at some point in their lives and commands our collective compassion. And can I also thank colleagues for their contributions, including some very profound and deep and meaningful personal reflections as well. Bereavement and grief, of course, is a time when people can feel particularly vulnerable. Grief can affect both our physical and mental health, and is often accompanied by feelings of loneliness, anger, anxiety and sadness. So it's important that people know that they are not alone, that it is perfectly normal to have these feelings, and that there are sources of advice and support available to them. We want people to feel they can openly discuss bereavement and its impacts, to remove any stigma surrounding the issue, and to encourage people to access support if they need it. Given the wide-ranging impacts bereavement can have, it's also important that the public sector works across boundaries and with third sector partners to ensure the right support is available. The Scottish Government welcomed the UK Commission on Bereavement report in 2022 and the focus it brought to improving the experience of people affected by grief. The report covered a range of issues which reflects the range of impacts bereavement can have on different aspects of our well-being, and highlighted instances where people might particularly benefit from support following a bereavement. One thing everyone might benefit from is basic access to advice. That's why coping with bereavement and grief is an important theme within our Mind-to-Mind online portal, with advice and videos from a range of individuals describing their own experiences. I'd like to thank those who contributed. These resources demonstrate what an intensely personal experience it can be affecting us all differently, but there are a range of supports and coping strategies which can help. Bereavement support is also an area of focus within our community's Mental Health and Wellbeing Fund for Adults, in which we have invested £81 million since 2021, with a further £15 million committed next year. There are several grassroots community projects supported by the fund with a sole focus on supporting those experiencing bereavement. Peer support can be invaluable. The third sector are key partners in the delivery of support, so I'm really pleased that Cruise is one of the beneficiaries of the Scottish Government's Fairer Funding Initiative, providing multi-year investment in key frontline support. While we will all experience bereavement at some point, it is important to recognise that some instances can be particularly traumatic. As the motion highlights, it is especially important that we support children and young people who experience bereavement. Schools play a key role in supporting children's mental health and well-being, and Education Scotland provides a range of materials and resources specifically focused on bereavement to aid teachers in delivering sensitive and effective learning on this topic. We have provided £16 million a year to deliver our commitment that all children aged 10 and above have access to a school counsellor. More than 2,000 children and young people benefited from the support of a school counsellor to deal with bereavement between April 2024 and March 2025. Outside of school, Child Bereavement UK has been funded by the Scottish Government since 2016 to provide support for children, young people and their families experiencing bereavement. Presiding Officer, the loss of a baby or a child can have a profound impact on parents. And I want to offer my deepest sympathy to anyone who has experienced this.
Christine Graham.
I'm pleased to say that I agree with what the Minister said about loss of a baby and child. I'm pleased to say we've moved on to recognise that miscarriages, there's a lot of grief attached to miscarriages, which used to be talked about as it was sort of a natural thing to happen. Of course it's not. And that we now support people through miscarriages and the grief that they have then for the loss.
Minister.
I think that Christine Graham makes a very important point, which of course is fully recognised and considered as part of the Government's policies. Presiding Officer, for most parents who have suffered a pregnancy loss, bereavement and grief support will be provided by their health board or third sector organisations, and they will not require specialist services. Our funding for Cruise and Child Bereavement UK facilitates a range of support, care and advice to families who have been bereaved, including those who have lost a child. The Scottish Government also funds the baby loss charity SANS, as was referenced earlier, to support NHS boards to implement the National Bereavement Care Pathway for pregnancy and baby loss in Scotland. And I'm pleased that all 14 NHS boards have signed up to the pathway. The grief experienced by those who lose a loved one to suicide can also be particularly profound. Bereavement support is therefore also an important strand of Creating Hope Together, the joint Scottish Government causeless suicide prevention strategy. We greatly value not just the pilot projects we have supported in Ayrshire and Arran and Highland, but the great work being done elsewhere by health and social care partnerships. Prevention of prolonged or complicated grief and support with bereavement is also integral to our new palliative care strategy, which highlights the importance of support and training for staff. Presiding Officer, while the effects of bereavement are most notably felt on a personal level, it is important to acknowledge its wider impacts. In addition to the impact on a person's well-being, bereavement can also place a financial burden on them. Our funeral support payment is helping alleviate the burden of debt many people face when paying for a funeral, and is likely to contribute towards reducing funeral poverty. The motion rightly points out the impact bereavement has on the wider economy. We know that workplaces which support and promote good mental health benefits both individuals and employers. This includes supporting people affected by bereavement. That's why we have worked in partnership with Public Health Scotland to develop a platform for employers that signpost them to a range of mental health and wellbeing resources, which includes support for employees affected by bereavement. The Bereavement Charter for Scotland was launched in 2020 by the Scottish Partnership for Palliative Care. Charter mark status is given to employers who demonstrate they are working to make their community a place where people who are bereaved feel supported by their employer and people around them. Presiding Officer, as we've heard today, bereavement can have a wide-ranging set of impacts on an individual and, of course, across society as well. The Scottish Government remains committed to working with partners to enable a joined-up approach where people are signposted to advice and support that meets their needs. And I would again thank members for their contributions and to Elena Whitham for bringing forward this important debate.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate and I close this meeting of Parliament.